2 of this wild paradise theory. So, finishing up on the discourse on faith with St. Peter, there's also this idea of, he says, if all the doctrine was understood, like if you could just read, Peter says this, if you could just read the doctrine, you could get it, you could get, the understanding of God or like whatever, there would be no room for sophistry, which means like, if people could just get it, read it and get it, then people wouldn't be dumb and like saying stupid things that like fall down on the basis of logic or aren't true to the doctrine or whatever. So this reminds me that you need to have like the experience of divine love or God, or you have this experience of faith in something along with the sort of scripture, which you see a lot also in the Vedic tradition. There's a phrase like, what good are the hymns of the Veda without having, meditation experiences that allow you to have different states of consciousness? So it reminded me of that. So then there's also this idea a lot in Paradise of the economics of faith, like using redemption as, and also like, by the way, I'm not really Christian. I was raised Catholic, but and I don't like, I'm obviously, the Catholic Church is crazy, but there is something that still I like about it, and I ended up going back to study Renaissance art and like Renaissance theology in an academic way, so that really helped me like sit with it. And I do think that there's power in anything people pour their devotion into, and I like some of the stuff, but I'm also like have a Sagittarius Saturn, so I'm just like, what if I just enjoyed every religion and like they thought they were all pathways to God, or pathways to, not really an anthropomorphized God, but like some sort of love that moves, as Dante would say, it is love that moves the sun and all the other stars. So I do think that there is some sort of collective consciousness at the core of things. But anyway, mostly approaching this from an academic perspective. And also from like a wild state of like experience of different states of consciousness perspective. So anyway, economics of faith, redemption, the idea that Christ like redeemed people through sacrifice is an economic metaphor, as well as Peter says, he asks Dante, do you have the coin? He calls faith the coin in your purse, and Dante says, yes, this is not a fake coin. I'm sure it's not counterfeit money. And Peter says, it's a precious jewel. How did it come to you? And then there's this interesting etymology note of like Italian moneta. It's from the same word as admonishment, which is, like to warn. And this idea of counterfeit, warning, preciousness, purity, authenticity, is a, thing that we come back to in a few cantos too, where Peter gets really mad about the church, and he's like, the church sucks, and I'm like, we know. And there's this idea sort of equating faith with money, that it has the power to establish the value of things around us, it has the power to create a consensus, it has the power of circulating, and it is a circle. And also thinking about my previous video with like quantum physics about like coins are spinning. It's like one of those, like if you saw like the end of Inception, there's like that spinning top thing. That's kind of like these particles, these quantum particles that spin and give rise to creation. Then there's also this idea of, with the money and the faith, that you can profane something with knowledge. Like money is kind of profane, but it's also being used in the language of faith. And there's always this like juxtaposition of the profane and the sacred, and how they're kind of intertwined, and kind of not, in the Renaissance idea, not very separate. Because the Renaissance was mainly about, what if like there was divinity in the everyday, and God was made in the image of man, which is kind of why I like it. Moving away from that Augustinian thing where he enjoyed a pear once and felt bad and was like, oh God. So, okay, moving on to the next. I know there's like a lot of background to this, but it's important. Moving on to the next test. Hope. Hope was, okay. Hope is the test of Saint James, who we really don't know a lot about. Like, there isn't a ton of mythology about him. Like, there is theorizing that he's, like, in some ways, maybe, like, Jesus' older brother or something, and all of that. There's, like, a division between St. James and St. Paul, where St. Paul kind of wanted to start a new religion of Christianity, and St. James wanted Jesus to just kind of be, like, a Jewish prophet. It's a whole thing, but anyway, that's irrelevant to this. That's all I know about St. James. Apparently. I don't know. So, I'm still trying to figure out why he's important to have in this hope situation. But hope in the Greeks was thought of as a delusion of exiles. It's all that's left in Pandora's box after all the sins escape. And there's such, like, in Greece, like, there was a whole thing about, you know, the lack of, it was just, once you left your home, you were kind of screwed because, like, there wasn't a whole society. Like, it was just all these factional city-states that kept, like, enslaving each other and conquering each other. So it's, like, you could really, like, find yourself a king one day and then completely, like, an enslaved person the next. And it was just a wild, like, time where there wasn't any stability. So that's why hope started off in that idea of being delusional. And then Dante, he thinks of hope as a virtue. The language, he uses the language of the clock and the wheel shows up in that idea of fortune's wheel, and shows up in faith as well. Hope is a forward-looking virtue. So hope has to do with looking towards the future, because you can't really hope in the past in a way. Like, you can't say, oh, you know, I hope something happens in the past. Hope is the most realistic of virtues because nothing is ever really over, and it is the opposite of despair and ossification, which we find a lot in the Inferno, where time has stopped, there's no hope, everything is finite, there's no sense of time, you can't see the sky move, you can't see, you're just doomed forever to kind of keep repeating these tortures. And also there is a part with Medusa where she's just sort of mentioned, but there's this specter of fear of ossification and petrification. You're imprisoned and you remain caught in the idea of the past in a particular reality. This reminds me of the I Can See You music video and the idea of, you know, during the lyrics, he's got my past frozen behind glass, but I've got me. There's a virtue of the future. It's a virtue that could even change the past. The past may no longer be what we thought it was, which reminds me of this whole re-recording process. Maybe a future based on the past will surprise you. Maybe things that you went through in the past actually structured a more hopeful future for you. So that in general reminds me of, like, all the vault tracks and her reclamation of her music and her spinning it into kind of some new narratives or adding additional context. And, you know, as we could see with almost the beachification or the elaboration of the beach themes of 1989. So there's this theme of, okay, well, this is getting so long.